Welcome to Tea Time with Talent Acquisition, the podcast aimed at fostering knowledge and sharing stories within the vibrant talent acquisition community. There's no surefire way to accomplish anything in life, but with each conversation, we aim to delve into diverse topics and present fresh perspectives to empower you, our fellow colleague, on your own journey to success. I'm your host, Eden, and for the next hour or so, I'm going to be joined by someone who started her career wearing multiple hats across internal sales, marketing, and HR. Over the last 8 years, she's not only been part of the transition and shift within talent acquisition from sourcing, but into more of a strategic advisory thinking position to help organizations create the right setups. This person is a true advocate for infusing human-centric approaches into processes to effectively draw in a wide array of talents. Conversations with her clearly reflect the immense passion she harbours for the topics that we're going to talk about today. So when you're ready, grab your favorite tea or coffee if you prefer, and join me in welcoming today's guest, Alaa, the Senior Talent Acquisition Partner from the team at Scoutbee. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Aidan, so much for the wonderful introduction. And I grabbed my coffee already.
Oh, lovely. I've got mine here. I've got my tea. There we go. Well, look,
Thank you.
I appreciate, like I said, you jumping on. So, as we always like to start these conversations off, I like to understand what got you into talent acquisition and HR in general. So, tell me a little bit about why you do what you do.
Okay, so I can, my career actually started back in 2010, right after graduation. And at that time, I joined as an HR generalist. So I was merely everything in the organization. But the thing that really ticked with me was talent acquisition, or actually back then was called recruitment, because at that time we were just expected to be an executor, filling in the positions, and that's it. So at that time, I wear many hats because I was hiring for different roles that didn't at all had to touch with business, where I graduated from. So it ticked with me because I thought, or I find it as a continuous learning. You always have to understand very much about the role that you are hiring for. If you're looking at it as a big puzzle piece that you're building, is that you see what are the missing pieces, and you see what would be the perfect fit that would match this missing state, so you can have a picture perfect. And connecting with candidates, building relationships, connecting with hiring managers, hiring teams. And I was really good at it, and I found passion in it that I talk, and I was able to tailor my message with different candidates who are coming from different seniority level as well. And yeah, I was good at it, so I continued with it. And then I slowly shifted into tech, onto the tech space or tech industry, where I started to be particularly working within the SaaS industry. And I'm recently working in Scoutbee, so it's a SaaS procurement company, and I'm the one managing and leading the talent acquisition function in here. So yeah, that's about myself.
Nice, and I love your analogy of the puzzle piece. It's very fitting because although we're talking about the perfect piece, there's no such thing as perfect, right?
Yeah.
And what we want to discuss today is obviously diversity and hiring and talent acquisition, their role in kind of this topic. So I want to kick it off to understand what's your understanding of, what do we mean by diversity? Because it's such a buzzword these
Sure.
days, and I just kind of want to have a clear understanding from you how you view the topic.
So diversity for me, it exists as a definition relationally within a group. So you can call a group of people a diverse people. So people are coming from different ethnicity, different cultures, backgrounds, sexual orientations, religions, and so on. So this is what you can call, or what you can name, a diverse culture to the core. But looking at it, I think there has been a little bit of moving away from this actual term. And when you talk with hiring managers or business stakeholders, they easily confuse it that an individual is a diverse individual, which doesn't exist. Because when you call a diverse individual, this means that you're actually labeling or actually identifying a person that there is a normal identity out there, and you are hiring against this normal criteria, which doesn't really exist. So I read a very interesting article about this, that we have to start decluttering from this terminology of hiring a diverse people, because diverse people doesn't really exist, but rather hiring a diverse group. So what you do is that you look at the culture, you look at the group that you are hiring for, or you want to build or want to expand. What are the group of people of this position consisting of? And then you look for the culture addition, and you look for diversity addition within this group of people.
So there's a lot to unpack, obviously, which we will talk about the group and talk about the culture in a moment. But just for curiosity reasons, why do you feel it's important that we make this clear distinction between diverse individual and a diverse group?
Because bias can actually jump into the table if you are hiring for if you're looking for someone who's diverse, then you can actually be biased, and you can spotlight biasness when you hire against diverse person, because it doesn't actually exist at all. So when you sit with the hiring manager, you have to make this clear distinction for them, that there's nothing as a diverse person, but a diverse group. So we look together, what are the current team that the hiring manager have at the moment? What are the skills, the competencies there is within the group? And you hire against competencies and skills. You don't hire against looks and backgrounds and so on. So all of this comes to the table, or comes to the conclusion that you have a full roundup of competencies, skills, people bringing ideas, different thoughts into the table to make things smoothly, and then deliver to the business goals or the business objectives at the end of the day. And this builds an inclusion and diversity culture at the end of it, hopefully does. But it brings diversity and inclusion into the table afterwards.
Who do you think should be the driver of this? Who should be the person leading charge in the process?
So driving the process, I would say it's human resources, like HR, whether the CHRO, talent partner, and people partner, driving in the conversation, sitting in the table with the leadership team, with the management team, to understand what are their views about diversity, what their thoughts about this, how they can build a diverse and inclusion culture. So you have to be in the beginning of the conversations with them, driving all of these thoughts, or putting in these thoughts in front of them to understand their thoughts about it. So you are the driving force, but then again, as a whole company, you are driving this ideology or this initiative forward.
So obviously the big factor behind it is that you already mentioned, kind of the company culture. So before you can even start thinking about who should we end up hiring and how do we go and hire them, we have to understand where we are today, right? So how can somebody in the talent acquisition team get a clear picture of what the culture looks like, or from a diversity and inclusion perspective today?
Okay, good question. So my methodology, my true pure methodology, is that before I go into any planning for hiring or expansion, I look at the current collaboration and communication. So how does the management, or how does the leadership team communicate and collaborate with their team? How their team communicate and collaborate together on a cross-functional level, on a direct level, and what are the current, at the moment, initiatives towards diversity and inclusion? How is the company dealing with different employees coming from different backgrounds? Or when we hire for a new person or a new employee, what are the policies, what are the procedures to support people who are coming from a minority background, or a working mother, or an immigrant, and so on? How can we support them during the onboarding period? So putting all of this aside, you also have to get all the information. So to run an engagement survey, for example, because engagement survey, you can throw different questions inside of this engagement survey to spotlight and highlight different communication and collaboration and values factor, to know if the company actually deliver based on the values and the objectives they say they will be, or there are in the company, and if the employees are actually bought into these values, and what are their thoughts about these values? Do they think they have a purpose on what they are doing? Do they think they are being heard when they voice their own opinion in a team meeting, and so on? So all of these you always have to take into consideration when you build a culture, and when you want to hire or expand the team, because you can hire as much as you want, you can bring diverse candidates as much as you want, but then if these issues are not addressed from the beginning and being treated from the core, from the root, from the beginning, these candidates will be eventually leaving after some period of time, and we will be back to point zero.
So there's a lot of elements that you can focus on. So
Yeah.
you've gone through them quite quickly, but the engagement survey should be able to give a lot of context to where you are as an organization today. Obviously, quite a relatively straightforward thing to produce and put out into the teams. Hopefully, a good response rate back. The other elements that you've discussed as well, they're not as straightforward to get immediately, because saying to your C-level, what's your take on diversity and inclusion? I guarantee most people say, yeah, we're for it. Let's build an inclusive company. But in reality, they might not want to have the cobwebs in their closet really open, because how they've always built their culture, it can be quite tough for a founder and to a C-level to hear maybe things that they've slipped up on. So those kind of more, let's call it qualitative research elements, where it takes a little bit more time, how do we kind of focus on those when there is a pressing need still to continue hiring from the business as well? Because what you're saying is, obviously we want to know where our baseline is today before we start hiring, but we've got jobs coming in, we've got requirements coming in, we've got stakeholders that need support. So there's kind of this balancing act, right? So how do we kind of walk that tightrope?
So true, I agree with you, but as well, if you're looking at HR, so we have different persons or different stakeholders within HR. And for example, I'm speaking out of experience in the company. So we work parallelly together. So we have the talent part, we have the talent people or the talent partners, and we have the people partners. And we work in together to identify what are the gaps. So looking, for example, at the exit interviews or the engagement surveys and so on. So then we start to map out what are the gaps or where are the gaps. And it's really safe to always identify and to acknowledge that everyone is biased. Everyone have bias in their subconscious that they cannot tackle or they cannot highlight when they talk or when they ask candidates questions. But being always advocating for the process. So for example, from my own experience, before I start the hiring process, I map out all the competencies that has to be there, the do and don'ts when it comes to the questions in the hiring process. So you reach out to the stakeholders who will be attending the interview, and then you sit with them, explain for them what are the actual competencies that needs to be examined or need to be checked during the interview process. And then we drive questions that tackle or actually highlight these competencies, because you cannot give it or you cannot leave it for gut feelings when the stakeholders are being are interviewing candidates. So you have to be very clear for them, provide very specific guidelines that they have followed through. And as you mentioned, it's not like a magic wand that results will come all of a sudden, but it's more of a long, continuous process that can make an effort. Because building a diversity and inclusion workplace or building a positive culture in the company, it takes a long time, merely between 6 to 12 months. So you get the time to educate and advocate, being an advocate for every business holder in the company about how they should be talking or what they should be doing during an interview, and how they should be approaching a candidate. From a people partner perspective, they sit with the managers or with the leadership team to identify what are the methods where the collaboration and communication are being held within the team. So how they actually collaborate, how frequent are they talking with their team, what are the guidance or how the conversations look like when they talk with them. Do they actually hear them out or not, and so on. So it's always a parallel plan or a parallel strategic plan that you always put in place between the partner, people partner, and tenant partner, and we walk through the same road together to make the same conclusion or the same result at the very end of the day.
Quite nice to hear that obviously you say it's a long journey, because I think what a lot of people might want to do is, just it's something that they want to implement, got the blessing from maybe the C-suite, and they just want to go 100 miles an hour, and then, kind of get frustrated when it's not happening 2 weeks from now. And it's obviously it is a long journey. So for your mindset, it's okay, let's understand a baseline. What do we have today? Let's just get a scope of where we are as an organization. As you say, the communication components, the values. Let's use the engagement surveys. On the engagement survey, sorry, what would you suggest, or what would you expect as a good response rate for kind of an engagement survey?
So, for example, within Scout B, anything that's above 70% we identify as a good indicator. So anything that goes, and then we map out an average. So we bring the data, highlight the data that comes from every team individually to see which team falls behind or which team actually accelerate and have higher response rate. And we make an average out of this, map out all the answers, like the pro and contra, and we take it in front of the leadership team. So anything above 70 I think is a good rate.
And if it's below 70, do you still act upon the responses that have been brought forward?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Even if it's above 70%. So like the latest engagement survey we did was around 73%, and we had to act upon it. So we put everything that was reported negative and everything was reported positive, so we can put it as like a success factor that we have to continually move on this direction, and where are the gaps that are still there, and what should be the plan. So we started to plan ahead. What workshops, what conversations, what are the discussions that should be there in order to focus on these gaps.
Then you're using future engagement surveys to determine along the roadmap, did it work, did it not, do we continue this? Okay. And obviously exit interviews, as you said there, we're using the knowledge taken from people who are departing us, and again, how can we continue improving? So there's a lot of kind of planning process that goes into it, right? And then obviously from there, you mentioned you identify the gap. So that's obviously still only half the story, right? So once we've got the gap, how do we identify what we act on first? What's the most pressing, or, KPIs, for example, let's talk about that side of things. How do you identify out of the list what do you actually need to explore?
I think the most factor that is directly related into making the company a successful employer to work for, or actually achieving their own objectives and goals. So if we're looking, let's say as an example, if we're looking at the brand of the company for the market outside, this attracts candidates, this attracts customers as well. So everyone looks at the brand of the company from the outside. And if it's actually delaying the company into achieving their goals, because you cannot funnel in candidates to be hired in the company and stay for more than 2 years, let's say, in order to be full-time dedicated to work on a project and deliver on these projects, so we can achieve the business OKRs or the business objectives for the quarter. So if this would be my first indicator, what are the delaying the company into achieving their own objectives, and how much of percentage are the company actually achieving of their objectives on a quarter base? Does everyone think they have a purpose, or they actually understand the objectives they are working on to deliver, and so on? So these are for me the main indicators that you have to look at. If the company is failing continuously to deliver on their objectives and their own goals, then we have to focus on this first, because you have then to look at the own engagement and the own encouragement of the employees. Are they really encouraged to stay in the company? If not, then what's wrong? Are they not being heard? There's no sufficient collaboration. There are not sufficient backup from their managers in order to support them into their own career, into their own goals, and so on. So for me, these are the main first things that you have to look at And then you have to execute a plan, because everything will fall behind afterwards. If you look at these things in the beginning and people start to be motivated back again to work, eventually everything will come back into place.
So it's not just about, okay, how do we add an extra group of people to the company? It's how does the company's goals look today? What are we focusing on? How do we increase, obviously, communication lines? How do we increase inclusivity within what we already have to reach those? And then how do we add additional to get there quicker or to get there further? So it's okay. I understand. With the understanding of, we know where we're going. We know what we want to achieve. Then we obviously have, what you refer to as the job life cycle, the process that comes behind the scenes. It's the actual recruitment part, right? There's a lot of different aspects that we can break the recruitment down. But I'm curious because you've already mentioned around a little bit around kind of bias and obviously upskilling, workshops, sorry, and things like that. So I'm interested to understand your take on kind of interviewing specifically when it comes to this topic. So tell me a little bit around kind of what's worked best, either at Scoutbee or in former companies, that kind of you would like to share.
So for me, interviewing is the best part, that close to my heart, because you get to connect with the candidate firsthand, and I always see myself as like an external sales, if I would put it this way, because I'm the image of the company, and whatever I say, whatever I do, it reflects purely the culture of the place that I'm working in, and it's always a trial and error thing. So I didn't like picked it up first successfully in the beginning, but I always took the feedbacks from the hiring managers, from the candidates, to know what's the best interview style. And what was the most successful way that I found really, really working with the candidates was to humanize the process. Humanizing the process means that you have to show respect, and you have to show that you really precious or appreciate the time of the candidate that they took in order to be interviewed you as a company. Because for me, the power in the past 6 to 7 years was purely in the company's hand. They were the one who chose which candidate to take, which candidate to reject, and so on. But with the shift in the market at the moment, we all equally have the power. So the candidate as well have the power to make their own conscious decision if they want to join this company or not. So in the beginning, you have to show respect for the candidate. You have to ask, how do you properly pronounce their name? What are their pronouns? To show that you are inclusive and you completely understand that people are coming from different backgrounds. And then in the beginning, you have to map out the process for them, to explain what's the purpose of this call. And it's always better that they receive a before document explaining and mapping out the process. And this is what I always do at the moment, is that I always send them out a document like 3 to 4 days in advance before the interview, to explain to them exactly what's the hiring process that they will go through and what they should be prepared for, and then including the LinkedIn profiles of the hiring committee that they would be interviewing them, and sending them as well examples of the questions that they would be asked during every stage of the hiring process. Because you have to make them prepared. It's always not nice that you have a candidate jumping in a call without them knowing what they will be assessed based on, or what are the competencies they will be evaluated for. So mapping this from the beginning to them, so they can be mentally prepared, and give them time to think upon the question that they will be asked. And then they can also, by themselves, have the conscious decision if this is the right fit for them or if it's not. So I take it up on me that I get myself acquainted and knowledgeable about the role in their specific information. What are the technology stacks? What are the projects that this person will be working on? And I have to put it up front to the candidates. What are the current stage of revenues that the company is at the moment, to see if it's actually profitable place, or their current pending situation in the company, in the market. So all of these information upfront for the candidate will give them the power and the information enough that they feel if this is the right space for them or not. So this for me works, like up until now, it works best. to always talk with the candidate and share everything you know about the position.
I guess that's been as inclusive to everybody as possible, because what you often find is if somebody, say for example, I want to come and work for Scoutby, right? I know you, you know me now, and you might give me a little extra support versus somebody who's applied directly, and then that becomes bias towards one individual, which means the whole process then becomes a little less inclusive, right? Just an example. So by having a very clear-cut structure, everybody receives this, the information is the same, then everybody
Yeah,
understands who they're speaking, and it's the same thing for everybody. So it creates an environment where, as you say, it's 50-50. You decide, do you want to work for us? We decide to want to work for you. You want you to work for us, sorry. But at the same point, everybody has the same starting point. Then it's down to the
exactly.
core competency that you produced during the interview. And, you know, well, you also mentioned earlier about gut feeling. So can you explain to me what you mean by that? Because I guarantee people listening to this will go, oh, I've got a good gut feeling about that person, or a bad gut feeling about that person.
Yeah,
And I guarantee careers have been, lost and made over gut feelings. So
sure.
tell me what you don't like about it.
Yeah, I've had many conversations and many scorecard reviews after the interview, like with different business stakeholders, where I see the sentence, like, if I don't have a good gut feeling about this candidate. And this doesn't really qualify as an indication if this person is a good fit or not a good fit for
Mm,
the role. Because then you are falling into implicit biasness, is that you feel it for your own, give it for your own feelings and your own biasness to see if this person connects with you somehow. They have the same attitude like you are, or have the same educational background and same interest. And this is where you don't have a gut feeling, or you might have not a good gut feeling about a candidate. Because at the end of the day, we connect at work on a project based, on a business side of things. So you have to evaluate the candidates based on proper and guided performance guidelines to see what is this position will be delivering based on business objectives and goals. If
mhm.
this person ticks all the criteria, then he's a good fit. Because if they have all the competencies that has been mapped out in the beginning of the process, and every stakeholder that was involved in the process was evaluating every candidate based on the same structure interview process, then this will be eliminated, and you cannot leave it for gut feeling at all.
How do you change someone's perception of that then? Because again, the talent acquisition professional, and I agree, by the way, I think it's the right move to kind of rid that phrase. But how do you change the mindset of your hiring managers who've always hired that way, and we're trying to change their vocabulary and they may not understand it? So how have you kind of done that in the past?
For me, I always drive the conversation. So when I look at the scorecard and I see a very biased ratings, for example, or not competency related
Mm,
ratings or scorecard being submitted from the hiring manager or different stakeholder and who has been involved in the process, I always sit with them. I ask, what were the questions that has been asked? What were the pitfalls that this candidate you saw didn't answer, and then you map it out with them, you dig deeper with them, and then you have to map out for them very clearly what are a very gut feeling looks like, and what is a structured competency related evaluation looks like. So you have to make the clear distinction for them, because you might have the assumption that everyone knows and everyone is completely aware of their own biasness and is completely will be fairly evaluating all candidates the same. But you always have to drive the conversation from the beginning. So during the kickoff meeting with the hiring manager and with the hiring team, you always have to clearly identify that this is the process. It's a structured way of interview. These are the
mm,
competencies that will be evaluated. And then you have to make sure that everyone is evaluating based on the same criteria. Again, as I mentioned, it will always a trial and error. No one will nail it from the beginning. And you will always get people who have been submitting a scorecard based on nothing at all. And you always have to continue the discussion with them, schedule meetings, talk with them that this is not right, and or this is not how things are being done. And you have to look at the business objectives and business goals rather than your own gut feeling or your own intuition about someone.
Which then
So yeah.
makes sense when you said at the very beginning about it shouldn't, it's driven by everyone, but it should be kind of spearheaded by the talent acquisition team, because if you boil it down, you know, you're the gatekeeper, as you say. You're the first contact to the candidate. You need to present the organization, but also, you know, you're the gatekeeper to the hiring manager. You need to understand what they want, and you need to then educate both sides along the process to get the outcome that everyone wants, right? So it's down to the talent acquisition team and the people partners and the business partners to really drive. And we're talking more about inclusivity here, right? It's not necessarily about hiring a diverse group of people at the moment, but we're talking about creating an inclusive process here. So about driving the right conversations, upskilling people the right way, and kind of being comfortable talking about it yourself as well. I find that quite a difficult thing to do sometimes. You know, I think I've personally tried very hard on my own journey to kind of skill in how to be more inclusive and how to communicate better with people, but it can be challenging. You know, you always slip into ways that you shouldn't or whatever. And I think it's kind of just recognizing we're all human, you know, we make mistakes, and it's about recognizing it and just trying to be better. Um, I heard a phrase, I know you're a big fan of this as well. And I spoke about it a little while ago, actually. Obviously we were at articles and white papers and whatnot, and I used the phrase in there as well. It's about being an ally. And obviously as a white man, from obviously the UK, so European, um, you know, being an ally to an underrepresented group is, you know, one of the best ways to drive inclusivity and diversity within a process. So can you explain to me a little bit about your take on what it means to be an ally or to be a partner, and then how someone could actually go out and try and educate their hiring managers on this themselves?
So to make it very clear, I'm a partner for the company. So I'm working with the company to hire the best fit or the right fit for the role. But also I'm an ally to the candidates when I talk with them to see what's the best for them.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to educate the hiring managers about this, about that they have to look further for the competencies of the person, and if this person, their skills can be utilized for something differently, and if it can be actually used in a different way, in the best way for the company. Because sometimes, and I've seen it many times, a lot of times when I talk with the candidates during the hiring process, especially for candidates like who are women or people are coming from different ethnic background or coming like immigrants and so on, they would be accepting a demotion or a salary decrease because either they are just like want to land the job and they just wanted the imposter syndrome as well plays and kicks in the person, that they see they are completely in a different region or a different country and they are just happy with whatever they get. And from my side, I have to act as an ally to tell them, no, you're actually overqualified for the role, or your skill set matches something differently that we have already in the company, and we would like you to keep you as a prospect for this position in the future. For women, because it's one of the core competencies or the core KPIs that we have is closing the gender gap. You always have to educate females that this is not the benchmark or the salary band that they should be negotiating or talking about, even not in this interview, but further interviews with the companies. But this should be in the actual band they should be proposing and discussing, and how they should be negotiating over these. So sometimes my interviews take a different direction with the candidates, is that I acted as an advocate or an ally for them to tell them what works best for them, and they shouldn't be accepting something lower or below their own expectations or their own experience level just because they want to get the job. Because it's not about that, and things can be, if they have been hired in the wrong company that has the wrong culture, things can be further extended into not being promoted in time, not being not having the salary increase as the rest of their peers, because like the management can see them as they are fine with anything, they are okay having a lower salary, and the pattern will be continuing this way. So giving them the power or giving them the encouragement that this is not that what they think that you should expect or accept from a company, it gives them the power as well, that they feel that they are being supported by a company, and this is a company that actually being truly inclusive and diversity, that supports candidates from different backgrounds and completely understand the different mentality of the people coming from different cultures.
Point about how your interviews can take a different turn. Because I do find, and this isn't exclusive to internal, this is external as well, but I do find, and we use the phrase square peg in a round hole, right? So you're just trying to force a process through for whatever reason. You know, you might have a KPI to hit, you might have a stakeholder that's really kind of just needing someone, and you just want to put something in front of them. But that
Yeah.
something is a person. And that's what I think people sometimes do forget. And it doesn't matter if you know you have the best company in the world, in your opinion, if it doesn't match what they want, or if you, as you say, you feel they're overqualified, the match long term is never going to be right. You know, they might start, but they'll leave very quickly, or you know, they might get all the way through to the process, get the offer, and never accept it because it was never right. So it's just a huge amount of time wasted. So I love the fact that you're educating at the very, very beginning, and that also links back to switching our roles from sourcing to business partners. And it's kind of having a different mentality. It's a conversation I had actually in a former podcast we've done with the head of talent acquisition at a company called Billy. We had the same perception. It's our jobs as talent acquisition specialists are now focused about being real business partners and having the awareness is, does this person match today? If not, can they help match tomorrow, as you've mentioned? And if neither of those, how can we then educate them so they have the best experience from me and from the company in question that they might return to us in the future? And I've definitely had it in the past. Again, maybe it's a little bit easier as an external recruiter because I have a variety of roles that they can talk to me about. But I've known people for 8, 9, 10 years. I've never hired, but they always come back to me for jobs when they're looking. I always seem to miss out on one or two individuals because the roles I have just aren't exactly what they want. But they come back and they try, but they value the work that I've done with them, and it's how you make somebody feel, and it's the allyship, as you say. The the one thing is obviously talking about internal recruitment, right? And I mentioned it briefly to you before, and you might not use externals today, and that's, you know, maybe from experience, but there's going to be people listening who do work with external recruiters, and they do work with maybe freelance recruiters or embedded recruiters or whatever. You have a perception because you're the business partner, because you're employed, you know, Scoutby pays your monthly wages. But
Mhm.
how do we get the externals or the freelancers or the RPOs to also share the same mentality around what we're talking about here about allyship and partnership as you do?
So from my side, and I've worked in the past, just like didn't utilize it recently, but I've been working with external recruiters. And for me, the best way is to get them on board and for them to have the similar information that I do have. I always share with them everything about the company. So our value or the mission and vision statement, what our company stands for, how our teams are structured. As well, sometimes I share with them a product demo that they can read about it and understand what our product value proposition, so they can understand what the customers that we are working with, what our product offering, who are the teams that are working, what are the list of the benefits that we offer for our employees, what about salary raises cycle. So I give them all the information to qualify them to do the first screening call with the candidates. So if the candidate, for example, asks them, what are the development track in the organization, if it's vertical, if it's horizontal, and what's the development budget that this company is offering, what are the conversations that this company is having on a regular basis, on a quarterly basis, and so on. So I equip them with all the information so they make the best impression as much as they are working as an internal recruiter in the company. Because if they will be the first person that the candidate will face or will talk with, they should be properly prepared and know exactly what they say. I also as well invest that they are included in my weekly meeting with the hiring manager, so they know what good looks like. So what are the candidates profiles that we want to look at the moment? So what are the criteria, the competencies that we are being evaluated on? So as well, they can get their own perception of fairness. So what are the competencies or the skills that we are actually mapping out, so they can have as well a saying if they see, because as well, from my side, external recruiters have a very, very good understanding of the market. They see the candidates, they are aware of the skills in the market, and they can advise the business as well of what's the best for us. So if they see that there are some of the criteria that doesn't really make sense or will not ring a bell with the candidate that they have, they can actually also advise us.
Yeah.
So I give them the advisor role in the organization, or when we work together in utilizing or filling in a role. But as well, I equip them with all the information they need in order to make the proper or the right conversation when they approach a candidate.
I think that helps close the gap between, sometimes it's like an us versus them mentality from both sides, where it should be
Yeah.
a we mentality to support the business in question. And external recruiters are limited in the sense, as you say, you've used them before, you don't need them today. It's natural. But you need to have people that you rely on and you trust and you have partnerships with, as you say, and having that information. I mean, we do it a lot with the companies we work with as well. It's maybe not to the extent, I'll be transparent. I've actually never heard of that extent of, pay cycles, maybe in super length, vertical, horizontal kind of development roadmaps, etc. But we kind of do understand the advisory role. You're absolutely right. I think externals have a great way into that, but it's about making sure, I guess, from your perception, determine who is the right person, who has the mentality. So if you give them everything and then maybe the candidates aren't coming prepared or they don't have an awareness of who you are, you're very quickly going to know who's doing their job, who's not doing their job, do they share our values and mentality around kind of creating this inclusive environment or not, and you can kind of work it out from there. A lot of that is obviously around data, kind of data-driven approach, right? And a lot of what we're discussing today is, as you say, long term, and it's not something that you can just do once and be gone with it. So how do we bring data into the fold of creating a more inclusive environment and more diversity in the groups of people that we're hiring?
So about diversity, so I will talk separately, diversity and inclusion. And about diversity, so when it comes to the pipeline or when a position is being open, like what we do is that we add demographic questions and any diversity other questions to identify the pipeline and how the pipeline is being filled. And if you see any gaps, so you bring the data to the light and you show it to the hiring managers, to the team, to see how diverse is the pipeline and what's missing. And if you craft sourcing, or when you do sourcing strategies to reach out to the fallout group of candidates who are not filling the pipeline properly, how they are reacting to these messages. And then you iterate from there, because when you look at the data and you feel that, for example, the position is not filling with women, for example, or people of color, you have to look at the job description, how inclusive or how diverse is the language of the job description and requirements. If it's mainly crafted, let's say, and how can you reiterate from this? So that's when it comes to the diversity. But when it comes to the inclusion, you have to look at the data of the candidates who are in the pipeline, the conversion rate for these candidates who are in the pipeline, and if there's a pattern there. So who are the candidates who actually go to pass through rates and who are the candidates who fall out? And if there's a pattern that you can highlight and bring to the table or bring to the light in front when you talk with the managers or with the management or the hiring manager. And you also have to check about the drop-offs. So how many candidates are dropping off the actual conversation through which stage of the hiring process. So if it's directly after the hiring manager interview or the technical interview with the team, and why are they dropping off? Are their messages are not being actually inclusive when they talk with them? Are the criteria and competencies that they are being evaluated during the interview are not clear enough, and so on. So all of these information you have to gather and you have to map it out and bring all the numbers to light when the position is being filled. What I do is that I normally do it on a 2 weeks basis. So to look at the conversion rate of the candidates in the pipeline and how it's being filled. So you can back up your conversation when you talk with the hiring manager.
You took the words right out of my mouth. My question was going to be how often. So we do a 2 week cycle sprint, essentially, evaluate, adjust. I really like the fact that we're not just utilizing the data and saying, hey, we've got a percentage dropping out after first interview, second interview. Because I'll be honest, we used to do that. We used to have a system called Cube19, which is like an external data platform, right? But it doesn't really identify outside of the numbers. And the numbers are great because it really says, okay, our first interview drop off is dramatically higher than the second or third or whatever. But then there's no data to suggest why. So it's those conversations, and that's the mix between quantitative and qualitative kind of discussions, right? We've got the data. Let's go to the people directly. What was happening? Let's read the scorecards with you. Is there gut feeling in there? Okay, why? Let's re-educate. But it's constantly having this conversation of why is this happening? And it's trying to improve every single step of the process, not just when you're feeling the burden. I think that's probably the other element to really factor in is we've got a low, and let's talk about gender because you mentioned obviously it's a drive to close the gender gap, but we've got a lower than average expectation of women applying. But why is that? Do we have a lower expectation of women already in the company? Do we have any women in senior leadership roles? How do we create opportunities to do this? But obviously women is one avenue. You've got obviously, as you say, a diverse group to look at. So it's constantly trying to work out how to improve marginal gains and then obviously keep going from there, which can become daunting. I imagine it can become.
I'm
I
sorry?
imagine it can become quite daunting when you have all of this work in front of you, as well as all of your normal day-to-day work and all of your, kind of other projects you've got going on. What would you suggest? So I'm talent acquisition, I'm internal, I'm an individual contributor to the team. What would you suggest I do today to start this process, get the ball moving around creating a more inclusive and diverse group inside my organization?
That's a very broad question.
What's the first two steps? Let's start there and then let someone else go on.
But I can, out of my own experience, because when I actually first started in Scoutbee, so I had it on my own self as one of my own KPIs that I wanted to achieve is to bring more diversity in the table, which was one of my successes. So I started Scoutbee 1 year and like 8 months ago, and back then it was only one female in the senior leadership team. And then we had around 30% of females in the company across 100+ % at that time. So I took it up to myself that every pipeline that I will fill, it has with exactly 50% rate of female, male, and as well people coming from different minority groups. So it started to be more, and I started to drive the conversations more with the hiring managers, is that this is the current percentage within your team, and this is what's still missing. Because coming from different backgrounds, you always come with different ideas and different qualifications that will definitely add into the culture of the company. And at that time, so only last month, we have reached a 42% of females, and then we have 4 females now on the leadership team. So it was a huge success for me. But as well, it takes a lot of discussions, not a lot of discussions, but continuous discussions. So you always have to remind the team that when you present a pipeline for them, the pipeline in itself, it has to be diverse. And you have to know how can you support these groups? Are there actual policies that when you hire someone, coming from a different background or coming from a minority group, will you actually be able to support them? And what are the policies in place to support this in particular individual? For me, my day-to-day operation is hiring, but as well, I take it up on me to develop policies, to drive conversations, to sit closely with the strategic and the leadership team, so I can build in the conversations and build into their own mentality and the mindset that this is the norm, that you always have to hire for an addition to the company culture, and that's it.
Culture addition is
So it's just like
yeah,
1 year,
easy,
1 year plus.
easy. I think I like that. It's obviously it's clearly a passion. So I think it's one of those topics that if you're not really driven, not really passionate about it, it's just going to become a headache. 3 months in, you're probably going to
Yeah,
stop it, and you're going to probably do more damage than good. In all honesty, So if it's
true.
something that you're truly driven by, then give yourself time. Give yourself a clear expectation in your own mind about what potentially you can do to drive the change. As you say there, you've given yourself a 50-50 kind of pipeline. That's the target. I imagine sometimes it doesn't always end up being direct 50-50, but that's the goal. And it's kind of, as you say, the incremental changes and how we go from there. I really appreciate you taking the time. A lot to take in. There's a lot of information in this, but it's all good. And hopefully, obviously, it helps people in their journey towards, creating more inclusive and diverse kind of organizations. And I think it's also, as you say, moving away from understand there's a norm and then there's a diverse group of people. It's like, no, it's just a diverse group of people, regardless of where we're from. And it's switching mentalities towards that. So thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for hosting me
I
today.
appreciate that. Enjoy the rest of your day.